President Trump wants more trade concessions from Europe, but what does the EU have left to offer? The European Union says it plans to keep working towards a negotiated trade settlement with the US, and it will suspend trade countermeasures that were due to kick in tomorrow after the White House said Europeans need to offer more. Toby Gibb is head of investment solutions at Artemis. Toby, the EU wants to avoid escalation for now then, but what does it have to offer?
It's a really difficult period for Europe. You know, they've struggled, I think, over the last few months to come to a deal with the US. And you know, having been, you know, at one point threatening 50% tariffs a month or so ago, now over the weekend 30% tariffs being threatened. You know, that potentially is well, it's obviously better than 50%, but I think, yeah, pretty damaging for the European Union. The US, I think, now has a pretty strong hand to play, given that, you know, what's going on in Ukraine, but also I think Trump is somewhat emboldened by the fact that, you know, markets haven't really, well, you know, other than the big reaction at the beginning of April, markets have been pretty strong. Growth in the US has been pretty strong. Inflation hasn't really accelerated in the US, so yeah, potentially that makes him more emboldened and more likely to push the EU hard.
That market calmness is quite surprising, though, isn't it, considering the size of these proposed tariffs?
It is surprising. So, you know, if you think at the beginning of the year, the sort of blended tariff rate was around 2.3%. Now it's looking like 13%, with the potential of going, yeah, potentially meaningfully higher than that. And at the same time, European markets and US markets have been hitting new highs. Nvidia is now a $4 trillion company, bigger than the entire FTSE All Share. Yeah, that does look like there's a bit of complacency. And I think, yeah, as we move into the summer months when liquidity is low, the potential for, you know, some quite high market volatility, I think, is very much there.
Is it possible then that tariff negotiations could still escalate from here, that the EU might, after all, decide to retaliate?
I think it's possible, and I think they have to keep that in their armory. As you mentioned at the top, they've held off again on their countermeasures. So those are held off now again until the 1st of August, when the Trump tariffs are planned to come into effect. But they are working on another package of countermeasures, you know, much more meaningful than the 21 billion. And I think, yeah, that has to be kept in the back pocket in case the negotiations don't go well. But I think it's going to be very challenging for the EU to impose those.
But if that were to happen, if this 30% tariff on the EU that President Trump is talking about goes ahead on the 1st of August, if he doesn't, as investors have come to expect, chicken out, can the market be resilient, or might we see a shock?
I think it's going to be tough. 30% tariffs are, you know, are clearly very high, and that will have a significant impact on European exporters. Yeah, we've seen over the weekend and before, yeah, farmers in Italy and in France, yeah, talk about the impact that will have on their business. And these are exporters that are already grappling with, yeah, a big move in the dollar this year. So I think the dollar's down sort of 15% or thereabouts against the euro. So that's really impacting European exporters.
That was Toby Gibb of Artemis. Don't forget, you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.